Several years ago, the bluegrass and country music singer Kathy Mattea came out with a song very similar to the message title today. Train of Memories was the name of that song. And I listened to it recently and found it kind of fascinating because it's a song where the way she sings, it sort of reminds you of a train. And in the song, she talks about all of these memories that she has that come along like a train, and it's kind of haunting to her. Some of the words in that song, it says, every time you come around, I hear that lonesome sound. Ooh, train of memories. I see you waving, hear you go by, rolling down the tracks of the tears you made me cry. Ooh, train of memories. So it sounds like she has some sad memories that keep running through her mind, kind of like a freight train. Well, I got thinking about this, and I was thinking about the fact that memories are like a train many times. Whether they are good or bad, they just keep coming back over and over again. And as I thought about our service of remembrance today, I thought that the theme of trains would be good, because if you go back in time, this was a railroaders church. I believe we have one retired railroader with us today. I don't know if there's any more. There'll probably be some at the late service. But this was a railroad church, and I also come from a family where there were some railroaders in our family. And in fact, today during the service of remembrance, I'm going to be presenting a flower in memory of my grandparents. And one of my grandparents, my maternal grandfather, he was a railroader. In fact, he worked for almost 40 years down here in the yard in Enola as a brakeman. And as I think about the memories of his life, I have good memories of him. I remember as a kid him taking me to the farmer's market to get me candy or a gingerbread cookie, or helping him work out in the yard, or just the friendly times that we shared together. But of course, like anyone else, there are some darker memories of my grandfather, and one of those comes from the fact that he worked on the railroad. This is a darker memory, but it's kind of silly. As I understand, and those of you that know railroaders, that there is or used to be this procedure by which you could, quote, bump somebody out of their position and take their position. I remember my grandfather and my uncle, who was also a railroader, would say, "Oh, I got bumped today," meaning that somebody else took his job and you had to take another. So, well, my grandfather, from time to time, I guess he did some bumping, and he bumped this one guy to get his job, as was the custom. And the guy called my grandfather up at 2 in the morning and got him out of bed and said, "What'd you bump me for?" And they got arguing. So the next morning, my grandfather returned the favor. He called that guy at 2 in the morning, and he angrily explained his case why he bumped him. So that probably wasn't a good thing to do. The point is, with many people in our lives that we think of from the past, we have good memories, and maybe we have some not so good memories. And there's a mix of those that come into our mind like a train of memories. Now, my question for you is this: when these memories, when these thoughts go through your mind, and kind of like Kathy Mattea sang about, if it's something that kind of haunts you to think about these things, either because there are bad memories or because there are good memories, and you miss either that time in your life or those people, how do you handle that? How do we deal with this mix of emotions that come through a train of memories? I would like us to look at Psalm 77, verses 1 through 12 today, where I think we can get some clues or some hints, or at least some good advice, what God would have us to do as these memories flood through our minds. Psalm 77, verses 1 through 12. And what we're going to do, since we have time to do it, I'm going to read the whole passage, but then maybe go back through it briefly, verse by verse. I'd like us to hear both the forest, if you will, the big picture of the passage, and then maybe some of the trees, some of the individuals. So let's look at that. Psalm 77, 1 to 12. We invite you to follow in your own Bibles. You can pull it up on an app on your phone, or if you want to use one of our pew Bibles, this can be found this passage on page 577. 577. Psalm 77, verse 1, the psalmist writes this: I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. Listen to this. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. Then verse 4, you hold my eyelids open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old, the years long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? And notice the word Selah is there because that means the writer paused. So we'll pause a minute. Dramatic pause. Listen to what's next. Then I said, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. I will ponder your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. And if you go on then, it says, your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. You with your arm redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph. And there's the other Selah. So let's talk about this very briefly here. This Asaph, the psalmist, the worship leader, he's having a bad night, it sounds like. He's crying out to God in verse 1, knowing that God will hear him, but he needs to cry out. And in the day of his trouble, he seeks the Lord, but in the night, his hand is stretched out without wearying, meaning that he's crying out to God. And you know, when you hold your hand up long enough, you know, it gets tiring after a while. Oh, no, not in this case. He really wants to hold out his hand to the Lord because he needs him. You see, he has no comfort. My soul refuses to be comforted. And when I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. Good grief. There's something really going on here, isn't it? But if we're all honest, have we all had nights like that? Something going on, something that's causing us grief, maybe a train of memories from the past, one way or the other? Now, what's interesting here is after that Selah, and I forgot to mention that first Selah there, in verse 4, it appears somehow, to one extent or the other, yikes, kind of dangerous, that the psalmist is kind of blaming God a little bit for this problem. Notice he says, you hold my eyelids open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. Clearly, he's addressing God here. Some commentators have said, yes, that the troubling thoughts that Asaph is having, he sort of attributes them to God because of these memories and the way you created me and all that. It's because of you. I can't shut my eyes. Others are arguing that what he was saying here is that God is keeping his eyes open so that he can hear his truths or finally figure things out. Sort of like that song we sing, open the eyes of my heart, Lord. I don't know, but the point is that the troubling thoughts keep going on. And in verse 5, as you see, it sounds like there's a train of memories that's haunting him. He considers the days of old, the years long ago. And I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. So he starts going through the train in his mind. Maybe he's looking at each little boxcar and thinking about things. And then as he thinks about these troubling thoughts, he wonders, will the Lord spurn forever? God, are you doing this? Are you punishing me? What are you up to, God? Has his steadfast love, verse 8, ceased forever, and his promises? I'm not seeing a lot of good things here, Lord, at this particular time. So, have your promises ceased? Has the good stuff come to an end? Verse 9, have you forgotten to be gracious? Is there no more compassion? Is that what's going on? In other words, Lord, are you done with me? This train of memories and what I'm experiencing in the presence, it's too much. And it appears, Lord, like you're finished. But then after that, Selah in verse 10, something happens. He wakes up. What woke him up? Well, for some reason, and I believe it's the grace of God, he said, I will appeal to this. I'm looking back at this. To the years of the right hand of the Most High. What does the right hand represent? The strength and the might of God. In other words, wait a minute. Things may not be going well for me now, and this train of memories is just driving me crazy. But I'm going to think about God and his strength and what he did for me and for his people in the past. Verse 11, I'm going to remember your deeds. I'll remember your wonders. I'll remember, verse 12, your work, and meditate on your mighty ways. And he concludes in the following verses, your way, God, is holy, meaning it is perfect. That's a big transition. When you have that dark night of the soul, when you have those times where you wonder, God, where are you? This memory, these things, my thoughts, they're just about driving me crazy. But when you wake up and you remember that God is still on the throne, that he is still strong, and remember the things that he's done in the past, and realize that he's holy and he does not change, that's what gets you through those dark nights. Some people say, well, why do I need to learn stories about, like God bringing 8 people through a worldwide flood? That doesn't relate to me. I don't think I'm going to be in a worldwide flood someday. God said he would never do that before, and I'm in there with 2 of every kind of animal. How does that relate to me? Or how does it relate to me learning about a nation that was enslaved to Egypt, and they get out and they, run through the Red Sea miraculously? I mean, that's a fine story, but what in the world does that have to do with me? Or what does it have to do with me, when the nation of Israel, they just rebelled and rebelled and rebelled. God was still great. That's a good story. What does this have to me? Any of this stuff, the New Testament, the Word, it goes on, and people just think, I don't need to know those stories because they're not important. Yes, they are. Because what they do is, even if you and I can't relate to them, especially in the modern times, it's a reminder that God took care of his people. He had his mighty right hand, his arm of strength, if you will, and brought his people through whatever it was they were going through. He was always there for them. And we need to remember that as well. If you can't relate to that, think about the fact of the history of the church. When you look at church history, which we need to study the Bible, I know that, but church history is important because it is the most twisty, convoluted thing. If you ever study church history, oh, good grief. The fact that God's church continues to march on, as much as what man has done to mess things up in the church, it's amazing. The fact that we do things to mess up our lives. Think of your own life in the past and what God did to bring you through those particular times. It is amazing. Look to the past. Look to what God has done. And it will remind you that, yes, he is. He's still on the throne. And he's going to continue to be there with me. That's how we deal with this haunting train of memories. Looking to the goodness and the strength of God. I want to give you this little story. It's a train story. And I'm reading it to you because it was one that I read. That same grandfather that I mentioned who worked for the railroad, he died 25 years ago, this past December, and at his funeral, we all got to present something. I read this reading, and I'd like you to hear it today because I think it reminds us of God's goodness to us as we deal with those train of memories. Here's the story. A young girl was taking a long train journey. And in the course of the trip, the train had to cross over a number of rivers. She was scared. She just did not understand how the rivers could safely be crossed. As they drew near the first river, however, a bridge appeared, and the train crossed safely over. Several times the same thing happened, and finally the child leaned back with a long breath and confidence and said, "Somebody has put bridges for us all along the way." And that's how we find it in life. God has built bridges for us all the way along. So as you may be thinking about different memories, as you memorialize someone today, if you brought a flower, if you'd like to take part in the ministry of the service of remembrance, we intend it to be a healing time. But if in bringing up those memories of people that you loved in the past, it does trigger a train of memories, keep in mind that the same God who delivered his people, the same God who has a mighty arm, the same God that throughout your life and my life as believers, every time there's a river, he made a bridge, he's going to keep on making them. Let that be our train of memories as we move on in the future, serving him. Amen. For our service of remembrance, we're going to begin it in a moment. What we're going to ask you to do is, if you brought a flower with you that you'd like to present, I'm going to ask that you would come around to the aisle on my right or your left over here. We'll give you the microphone if you would like to be able to say who the memory is being presented, or who the flower is being presented in memory of. And then you can place the memory in the vase on the ordinance table and make your way back to your seat. If you want to participate and you say, "Shucks, I forgot to get a flower from the store, or cut one out of the garden this morning," we have an ample number of them in a vase on the deacon's table back there. Please feel free to use one. You're welcome to do that, because we want everybody to participate that would be willing to do so. And we'll begin now, and I will go first in our service.